That it? Okay. So you can take them in any order.
That's it, Counselor. Just
Yeah.
The engineer in me wants me to go like in order. So
Yeah,
you
we're
do
gonna-
you. Do
We're
you.
going to start from the top. Civic engagement. I made some remarks yesterday. We had it was a different kind of format where we had round tables. It was Reconnect Cafe, and we had these subject-oriented round tables, and you got to move around every 20 minutes. My takeaway from that was that I think our community is hungering for more innovative formats and forums for civic engagement. The traditional city public hearing where you have a timed 2 minutes, you're being televised, you're facing a governing body, you can't have a dialogue, it's a monologue. Do you know that? By rule, we cannot answer a question that's presented in a traditional public hearing. So what we need more innovation. I think it's a matter of access. I think our community at large needs to have better access to their elected officials. City Hall is on the northern fringe of the city. It's difficult to get there. It's difficult to find parking. It's difficult to afford parking. So we have some fundamental issues just with access. And so what we need to do is we need to provide additional official forums for community feedback. And we need to make sure that their feedback is being heard, noted, and being considered in city decisions. And so what I would advocate for is that we have meetings all around the city. And if we can't do that, one of the limiting factors when I inquired, Maria, is that city council meetings have to be televised and they have to be recorded and they're broadcast over the radio. And so what we need facilities. And to me, I don't think that that's an insurmountable issue for us. Maybe at Zona del Sol, we can convert a room there into a studio and have meetings on the south side. Maybe we can have a south side city hall annex, and it could be equipped with all the equipment and the cameras and everything to record. So I think we need another venue for city council meetings. I think we have a number of committees. I serve on many committees, but we don't allow opportunities for public input at committees, and these are much more informal. We get to discuss matters in greater depth than at a council meeting. And I would, as mayor, would say, look, if there's an issue that's complex or somewhat controversial, or if members of the community want to be heard on a particular subject, we should provide opportunities for public comment in committee meetings. And so we need to loosen it up. It's a little too tight, a little too formal. We need to have council meetings in at least one other location. People have talked about perhaps combining city-county government and having a regional consolidated county government at the Santa Fe University of Art and Design. I wouldn't rule that out right now. It makes a lot of sense. City of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County did that. So constituents can come to one location. And so I think we have many, many options, but obviously civic engagement as it exists today is much too formal, it's much too intimidating. We need more options, we need better access, and so if you elect me mayor, you're going to get a transformational civic engagement process. Okay, number 2, specific plans for bus transit. I'm proposing free public transportation as a candidate. And let me tell you why. You might think that's pie in the sky, but right now, the city of Santa Fe only collects 3% of the operating budget of the city. It's practically free. And so if you just look at the overhead associated with managing the cash, and the city of Santa Fe is not the best at handling cash at the moment. So hey, let's take that away. Let's just take that away. And so it's completely within the realm of possibility. It's about $400,000. And right now, our lodger's tax by law can be used for public transportation. Our lodger's tax revenues are at an all-time high, and they are growing. And I know Randy Randall, head of tourism, wouldn't want me to raid his precious lodger's tax, but if you elect me mayor, we're going to grab $400,000 and we're going to plug that gap. That way, it's revenue neutral to the general fund. And so that's why free public transportation is completely possible. And if you elect me mayor, it's going to become a reality. In terms of public transportation in general, I mentioned at the outset in my general remarks, I've seen people standing in the snow waiting for the bus without a shelter. I mean, do we not, have basic human decency and grant these people some shelter while they're waiting for the bus to try and take their kids to school or get to the doctor or go to work? This is appalling and unacceptable here in the city of Santa Fe. And so if you elect me mayor, we're going to change that. We have over 700 bus stops. 82% are not covered. Look, if we had 20 bus stops and 82% work, well, that's kind of manageable. This is a lot. And so those are the issues, I think, that some might think it's small ball. To me, it's a greater human dignity social issue. And it sends messages when its government does not do that for its people. And so we're going to get those bus stops covered. In terms of consolidation, I sponsored a resolution to do a consolidation study between the city of Santa Fe and North Central Regional Transit District. The issue is, so we have our own transit system within the city limits, but many people live outside the city. We need to make sure that they have adequate connections to our internal circulation system. And so I felt it was worthy to study the consolidation. Remember the blue buses? You guys all know the blue buses. Well, the city of Santa Fe is that donut hole in which the regional transit district operates around. And the study was not very positive. I don't think we had the best consultants, but I think that transit consolidation between the city of Santa Fe and North Central Regional Transit District is also within the realm of possibility. And if you think about streamlining it, here's an organization that focuses on one service relative to a city that provides many services. So how can a city that provides many services compete with a regional entity that just focuses on one? When I was a mayor in Española, I regionalized public housing and public transportation. And so we need more work on public transportation. But if you think about what free public transportation can provide, that will benefit people across class lines. Even our tourists, can you imagine getting picked up at the airport by a shuttle bus, stopping on the way, having a meal on the way to their hotel? It's very possible. Okay, fire shed plans. Oh, this is a tough one. The Santa Fe watershed is very precious. We rely heavily on native surface water through the Santa Fe River and the two reservoirs. And so what we have to do is we need to maintain that and thin it occasionally. I know it's very controversial. There's a lot of smoke and people are concerned about the health effects from that. But I've seen the devastation that a fire can make to a watershed. We saw it on Nambe Lake. Nambe Lake almost completely silted up after a fire. If you look at the Santa Clara Creek, has anyone been up there lately? It's like a bomb was dropped on it. The canyon no longer exists because of, when your watershed gets denuded, it's just massive erosion with large boulders. So we need to be very careful. We need to work with the Forest Service because they're our partner in managing our watershed. So my plan as mayor is to continue, thinning our watershed, protecting it. We are probably going to have one of the most devastating wildfire seasons in June than we've ever seen. Well, honestly, no. Knock on wood. I hope we don't. But we also have to be mindful of our watershed. I mentioned that we have two sources of surface water. We have Santa Fe River from our reservoirs, and then we also have imported San Juan Chama water that we divert from the Rio Grande. These are critical. They represent up to 85% of our total water use. We're only using 15%, 5 to 15% from groundwater. And so surface water is allowing us to recharge our aquifers because we know as we draw down groundwater, we can't recharge those aquifers as fast as we drain them. So that's a tough question. I think I'll end by just talking about the upper watershed. the upper watershed is completely on Forest Service land, and so we rely on them. We have a cooperative agreement with the Forest Service to work with them to also do some thinning up there. So it's really important. It's very important that we maintain our watershed and to make sure that it's not devastated by wildfire. All right. We number 2. Oh, bus transit. Did I answer questions about the?
I'm sorry, you didn't, about the wildland urban interface people up in the woods. What would the city?
Oh yes. Well,
within city limits.
you did ask that. Our fire department, we do have a wildland crew, and they're actually funded with state monies. And what they do is, for folks that live like in the foothills, they do an inspection and they make sure that there's an adequate buffer around the homes, and they have to clear to create that buffer around the homes. So we do that actively.
I just met with the chief Friday, and there've been over 2,400 surveys gone out, but 1 or 2 complied so far.
Oh, let me check into that. I'm not sure if we cite or we just it's like discretionary advice. I don't know if the city can actually follow up and cite them. I know that the fire department does have citation authority if they have excessive brush and weeds to the degree that they present a fire hazard.
And if I may, Los Alamos has a defensible space ordinance, and they do cite people there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Midtown Campus specific plans. Midtown Campus, Santa Fe University of Art and Design. The city purchased it right after the recession in 2008. I know people thought, what's the city thinking? But really, up until now, it was a profitable transaction. The lease payments that we were getting were more than enough to pay for the debt payments every year, to the degree that we actually had a reserve fund that we were building up. And we ended up spending that reserve fund down to subsidize the current tenant there, to kind of keep them open as long as possible. So the reserve fund is gone. We have about a $22 million total debt still due. The debt payments annually are about $2.2 million. We don't have a tenant that's gonna move in on July 1st. We just issued a request for proposals to hire a consultant to conduct a community-wide visioning for the future of the Santa Fe University of Art and Design. What I'd like to see is that we still preserve some of the current uses, that we not open up the entire footprint to redevelopment, but that we keep, for example, Fogelson Library, that we keep the Greer Garson Studios. So I think that if we can all agree that we're going to continue those existing uses that really have long-term, I think, utility and applicability, then I think we can come up with a good proposal. But I don't want to kind of preempt what the community at large wants to see at the Santa Fe University of Art and Design, but what I'd like to see is some of those existing uses remain. We've got multi-unit housing, got the dormitories. I think it's a no-brainer that the Santa Fe University of Art and Design ought to have an affordable housing component. It's a great location. It's a film school. We have a film industry that has a direct spend benefit in our economy of $125 million a year with a 3-to-1 multiplier. So that's almost $400 million a year benefiting our economy. And so I think we need to facilitate and help expand the film industry by continuing to have some kind of a film school. I know that the proponents are a film commission. They'd like to have a post-production facility there. I have some issues with that only because Santa Fe Studios, it's just outside the city limits. Their next phase, are you familiar with Santa Fe Studios? Right. Their next phase is to have a large-scale post-production facility. And I don't think we ought to be competing with Santa Fe Studios. I think we ought to work together. And we're having some issues there. So in terms of whether we should have a post-production facility or not, I want to bring in Santa Fe Studios into this discussion to see if in fact that should be a part of one of the major components of the future of the Santa Fe University of Art and Design. But what I'll say in closing is that it's an open book. We passed a resolution, I call it the kitchen sink. We want it to be green infrastructure, affordable housing, R&D, film. Right now everything's on the table, but now it's going to be up to the public to help with that visioning process. And so that's the phase that we're kicking off now. Okay, 25.
Oh, misspelled concrete, but there you go.
Concrete achievements in Espanola. In Espanola, I was elected in the year 2000. I ran there because the government was entrenched. There was folks in there that weren't very ethical. And I really felt like I could do better. And I ran on a kind of a reform ticket. So, and I ran against, the incumbent was a former mayor, and I ran against another former councilor, but they had like 30 years combined. I beat them both combined. But I got my butt kicked because I went up against, it was a machine, really. And it wasn't just the elected officials, it was the staff that had been there for decades. And so, wow, I mean, and I needed help. So in 2004, I recruited 4 progressive newcomers to run, three, to run with me on a reform slate. It was called Your Team. And we swept all positions on the ballot. And so we were at a 4-4 tie. The mayor was the tiebreaker. And so in 2006, I felt like, let's finish this. Let's do a clean sweep. And so I decided to run for mayor. I was midterm in my second term as a councilman. And I recruited 4 progressive newcomers. We swept all 5 positions. So we basically swept everybody out of office in 2 consecutive election cycles in 04 and 06. So what did we do? What did I do? My major achievements is we had an electoral system that was unconstitutional. The city of Espanola had been divided into geographic wards. You can run in any ward that you wanted to. You need not reside in that ward. The wards were created in the 60s. They didn't have any population balance, so you can see that it was clearly unconstitutional. So one of the first things I did is I redistricted the city for the first time in its history. And it's remained so since then. So people reside in the districts that they represent. The one person, one vote holds true in Espanola. The other thing I did is I ushered in comprehensive ethics reform that applied to the entire governing body. So right now, if you have an issue with the mayor down there, you file a complaint, it gets vetted by a committee, and if it's legitimate, it gets heard before a full ethics commission. So election reform, ethics reform, and I would say my other crowning achievement was resiliency. I governed during the recession in 2008. It was crazy, it was awful. But what we did is we managed to survive the recession. We were very aggressive in getting stimulus funds, ARA funds. We built the first ever geothermal heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system with ARA funds. We were able to initiate some key street improvements. So we did a lot of progressive things in Espanola, and many others involving public safety. But I would say electoral reform, ethics reform, and resiliency in the face of adversity, that being the recession. Okay, vacation rental plans. All right, I know this is a neighborhood preservation issue for us. If you've read the charter, we have a prominent paragraph in there, and we've declared our intent as a community to fight for neighborhood preservation. In fact, there's a mandate in there to the council that every single decision they make that has anything to do with neighborhoods, they have to strive for neighborhood preservation. So it's in our charter. It's supposed to be a prominent factor in any decisions that may or may not impact neighborhoods. So what have I done in terms of vacation rentals? This, I think, speaks to my point about the city passing a law and then forgetting about it. We had a short-term law on the books. We capped the number of permits for short-term rentals at 350. But that was 4 or 5 years ago. Well, the market has exploded since then. And so we had many many people basically renting their homes out. They weren't paying gross receipts taxes. They weren't getting a city permit. They weren't paying lodger's tax. And, you know, it languished there. A couple of my colleagues on the council tried to resuscitate it. And so it's very difficult, you know, as an engineer in a political environment, you can't just jump ahead to the solution many times. You have to take an intermediate step that doesn't cause too many ripples, that people are comfortable with. So I said, okay, let's do this first. I introduced a resolution calling for an assessment of the short-term rental market. And so we had Tourism Santa Fe do an assessment, and it wasn't very hard. You just go online, right? You just track all the permits. Well, what were the findings of this? We had estimates ranging anywhere from 1,200 to 1,400 active short-term rentals. And yet we had a cap of 350. And so what I did is I sponsored legislation to increase the cap from 350 to 1,000. Now the city is bringing in millions of dollars in gross receipts tax and lodger's tax. But it wasn't just about increasing the number of permits. Now we put in limitations on the density of short-term rentals. You cannot have two adjacent short-term rentals. And adjacent means side by side on the same side of the street and directly across the street. So we put in some parameters on the density. That way you don't have a proliferation of short-term rentals where you do have a degradation of neighborhoods. And so the other thing that we did too is we strengthened enforcement of short-term rental units. That's the thing. It's just we pass laws and we don't really put the meat into the enforcement. And so in my bill, we made sure to strengthen the enforcement of short-term rentals. So we recognized the growth of the market, we increased the number of permits, we strengthened the enforcement, and we limited the density of short-term rentals.
How's that enforcement handled?
It's handled through land use. We have one person that's solely dedicated to short-term rental enforcement. It's still not enough. We're supposed to have more. Yes.